Oh no, look at all these bad guys. What are we gonna do? Good thing there's Falcon Punchbot to save the day.
Hi, I'm Evan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the Falcon Punchbot, here to save the day and defeat all of your enemies.
This right here is the schematic for our Falcon Punchbot. So as you can see, we have our force resistor right here, which is getting powered by 5 volts from the lab jack, in which the force resistor, depending on how hard it's get pushed, that outputs a current and voltage through this LED. That LED just shows if it's running or not, which goes through a resistor to ground. But then it also goes through the lab jack into the analog input, into the lab jack, into the computer, which is then processed in LabVIEW, which then, depending on the voltage that's read, it lights up a number of different LEDs, or it sends 3.3 volts through each one of these resistors, through each one of these LEDs, and then back into ground. And as you can see, it actually on the project. So here's all our digital inputs into the resistors, into the LEDs. Here's the initial 5 volts that powers this force resistor down here. As you can see, when it's pressed, that LED lights up through that resistor into ground.
Okay, so this is our LabVIEW code. What we see here is it's initializing the lab jack itself and kind of identifying what it is. And then what the following is doing is it's taking the handle and giving it to all the handle ins to our 10 different digital outputs that we have on the lab jack, and these are simply just the channel numbers. And just so that we know where we're all on the same page when we're starting, it's just initializing them all in the state of 0 so that none of the LEDs are lighting up. And then besides that, we have a large while loop, and within that is this case structure. And so within the while loop, we see that our car is just going to drive around, and if this is not pressed, it'll just continue driving at a nice steady 35 like the speed limit says, and it'll just keep doing that in a straight line, and unless the case where someone walks up behind it and we have a proximity sensor for the infrared behind it, and it'll just stop, kind of become docile, and let you pick it up. And then in the case where it does bump into something, that's where the fun starts. We see that once it bumps something, it will actually stop and kind of identify that it is actually interacted with something and give off a little note. It'll then back up for 1,000 milliseconds at a speed of 50%, and then it'll actually randomize a speed for both tires, or both wheels, and it'll then just kind of charge forward at this randomized speed until it presses something. And then once it has pressed something, it will then read through the analog input to the force sensor, and from this force sensor, it actually goes through and kind of does a bunch of math that we've used by checking the baseline that is always present just for the force sensor by measuring the voltage, and we've just calibrated that correctly so that based on the calibration, we'll ultimately get something between a 0 and a 10, or greater than 9 basically, for the forces that are registered. And so for all the cases where this happens, it compares this voltage that we're reading into the lab jack, and if it's larger than 0, it'll turn on 1 LED, if it's larger than 1, it'll turn on 2 LEDs, and et cetera, all the way to 10. And so if it's actually greater than 9, it'll end up having a second case structure that it follows through, which it does one of the following no matter what the strength of the interaction. If it's false, it simply just reads off a C note at a 6th octave for 1 second. And if it happens to be strong enough that it hits something above what we've rated as a 9, kind of on the power level, it actually goes through, and this is just some LabVIEW code I actually stole from an example that the National Instruments just had on the desktop. Basically, we'll read through a wave file that we have that's actually the Mr. Game & Watch level 9 hammer sound from Super Smash Bros. And it will just read that, kind of indicating that you've maxed out and really defeated your opponent that you've bumped into. And so once this has happened and it's actually like kind of rammed into whatever this victim or opponent is, it'll then back up at a speed of 20 for 1 second, and then it'll turn off all of the LEDs that have been activated, and it sets them all just to the state of 0 again, kind of like initially, and then it will randomly pick a new speed for each tire, and this will just allow it to randomly turn around. And then once this has happened, it is then in the false state again, and we kind of start back over where we were initially, and it just kind of wanders around until it either has someone approach it from behind to pick it up, or it bumps something again, and this happens all over again.
All right, so this is the LabVIEW code that actually turns on our XY graph for the force resistor. So right here I have 2 arrays that are being initialized. One is for the timer, and we have this set up so that it actually gives it in real time and not the time at which the computer starts. Both these go into shift registers so they repeat and continue taking data. Right here we have our lab jack where it reads the analog input from channel 2, in which we have a little bit of math in there just to scale it down. The initialized arrays then go into these things called build arrays, which then, as well as going back through the shift register and repeating again, get put in this cluster, and they're bundled together and clustered and put into this XY graph, which you can see is all this right here. So this is our Falcon punch bot. As you can see over there is our data collection. Right now it's trying to drive around, but we're just holding it up so we can talk. So what happens is we have a little punch on the front, and with a force resistor which goes up into our circuit. So this resistor is going to collect data and put it into the circuit, which goes into the lab jack, which causes the program to decide what to do, and in this case it decides how many of these LEDs it wants to light up. And then through the rest of our LabVIEW program we have the robot hitting something, backing up, hitting it with an actual power strength punch, at which it's going to then give off a noise depending on the power level and light up LEDs, and after that it's going to turn around and look for another victim. This is our Falcon punch robot here. As you can see, he runs into stuff, punches, he's backing up, goes somewhere else. He's actually tethered into the computer right now, but that's how it works. He's going to actually go after me right now. He has a breadboard, as you can see on the top. There's our LED bar, which lights up, depending on the punch strength. So that one was a little bit off center. And then as you can see over here, this is our plot of all the force punches. So the more negative they are is actually the stronger it was. And yeah.
Okay, here we actually have the data that's being taken from our Lego Mindstorm robot with the lab jack. What this is that you're seeing right here is actually the relative voltage that's being measured across the force sensor when it bumps. And so we've really just scaled it for a nice purpose. And just as you go along, you can see the relative strength that it's bumping things. And so it'll just go along and then just hit things, and it just will continuously plot them, and it maintains them over time. We see that we have it here in real time, and it just, that's it.
Wow, what a fun project.
Yeah, right? It was pretty awesome, I must say.
What do you think you learned in this project, Evan?
For me, it was really getting better and more comfortable with LabVIEW. I remember in 256 lab, it was just a nightmare. I'd be dreading it, and I'd end up just having other people ask me for help, or going to them for help all the time.
Yeah, LabVIEW was just a nightmare. But now, it's a dream come true. I feel like I learned so much about how to incorporate the lab jack with LabVIEW, how to get it to get digital outputs, analog inputs, read information and just tell it to do something.
Exactly.
It seems so useful now.
Looking up a 10-bar LED and finding exactly how it works, just wiring it up ourselves, looking at the schematics, designating flexible input outputs. It's all just a piece of cake now.
Just putting it into this great little robot.
Yeah, it's what I learned.
Me too.